Okay, Google, stop the music. Thank you.
Happy to help.
What up, fam? It is your favorite cousin, your favorite uncle, your favorite friend, your best friend's best friend, me, Dr. Larry. Welcome to the Living For You YouTube channel. I'd like to welcome all of you back as I normally do. Those of you who are subscribers and who follow me and who are here weekly and who follow me on social media at Dr. Larry Smith on Facebook and Instagram, I want to say welcome back. I appreciate seeing you again. I just want to know how y'all doing, right? We going through this. We have ebbs and flows, ups and downs of the moment that we are in, but we are here. And trust me, if how you look is any indication to what you're feeling on the inside, then you're doing really good because you look wonderful. Y'all look exceptional out there. So I'd like to thank all y'all for coming and spending this time with me, my continual supporters. Keep supporting. Tell someone else. Let's build this community to be a massive community of where we're inputting positivity, information, and education and fun out there in this world because we can use more of it. I think so. I certainly know so. I believe so, right? So welcome. Those of you who are new, welcome to the channel. I hope I can see you again. I want you to go and hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell so that you're first to know when I release content, and you can be here every week sitting here right at this table that I've prepared for all of you. So go ahead and do that. Follow me on social media at Dr. Larry Smith on Instagram and on Facebook and even on TikTok, Dr. Larry Smith PhD on TikTok. I barely use TikTok, but I was just like, what the heck? I ain't been doing nothing, so I just did that. So anyway, so you can follow me on all those platforms. Get to know me, reach me, talk to me, communicate. If you need some coaching, you can hit me up at Dr. Larry at Live For You Coaching, or you can go directly to www.liveforyoucoaching.com, which is the life coaching business that I have. My coaching niche for my brand new people is helping specifically African American males between the ages of 18 and 40 deal with a trauma that they have gone through, that they have a hard time coming over to live a more present life. I help them to get into that present life that we all should be having. So that's my niche, but I help anyone. It doesn't matter. You don't have to be African American male, but if you are, I got you. And if you're not, I got you. And you don't even have to be male. So reach out. You can reach me. Hit me up, www.liveforyoucoaching.com. So welcome once again. Have a seat, relax, kick off your shoes, be easy. We're going to have a pretty damn good discussion today. And actually today's discussion relates to the black community. I wanted to have this discussion because I think it's so important at this time. We know that there are many problems in this country that disproportionately affect the African American community. And for example, when you think about this whole, situation as it relates to the virus, I think you two were not supposed to say the name, but you know what I'm talking about. As it relates to that disproportionately affects African Americans. We see much of the life that is lost is within the African American community as it relates to that. I mean, I saw one story where like 20 to 30 deacons or bishops died in the Kojic church. People are dying in places like Chicago and Detroit, and places like in Louisiana and New York, Harlem, and other places. I've seen this terrible story of this woman in Detroit who lost pretty much her entire family in the African American community. And it was specifically said by the healthcare guy who's over the president's health initiative, Fauci, Dr. Fauci, I think that's his name. He said it verbatim that this shines a light on the disparities in healthcare coverage and healthcare costs and healthcare accessibility for African Americans. So he drew a light to it, but we knew in the black community, we're aware of the dilemmas and the issues that we have. And there are many. Of course, obviously with this situation, health comes to a forefront. But we know within the social sciences and the sociology, ethnic studies, things I teach, and history, we actually call the medical situation in the black community medical apartheid, right? Because there is a situation where there is a disproportionate separation of resources and ability and access to in the black community as it relates to health. You can think about any situation as it relates to health. Number one in hypertension and congestive heart failure and things like that, the black community. Diabetes, the black community. HIV and AIDS in the black community. It's even getting to where cancer is beginning to rise and begin to disproportionately affect those in the black community. Access to health care and all kinds of things are prevalent, are not as prevalent or not as possible in, or even health care insurance as possible in the black community as it is in other communities. So we know, as far as health and as far as us being able to have healthy lives and live for long periods of time, it is dramatically impacted in the black community. In fact, the last numbers that I saw, and I just jotted a few things down because I think it's important to mention those things. The average age, life expectancy age, here's a number, for white women is 83, 84 years old. Living 83 to 84 years old. The average age for a black man is 74 years old. That's the life expectancy length. That's a whole decade of shorter life expectancy. And that's if they even get to see that, given some of the other social concerns that we have within the black community. So there is definitely a disparity in health. There's also a disparity in education, and social scientists, historians, sociologists, and ethnic studies people, and other people, politicians, we refer to the disparities in education as educational apartheid, because we see several things happening. Now, most of you guys know historically that in 1954, there was a decision called the Brown versus the Board of Education decision. And in that decision, it was stated that segregation in schools was no longer going to be upheld by the Constitution. The Supreme Court ruled in favor of that. Because if you know history, you know in 1896, we had a decision called the Plessy versus Ferguson decision. And in the Plessy versus Ferguson decision, segregation was upheld by the Supreme Court. It said as long as the facilities were equal, who cares if they're segregated? Separate but equal became the law. But what we were seeing between 1896 and before, up until about 1954, the second ruling, the Brown ruling, was that there was a discrepancy and the deficiency amongst black schools and black organizations and black institutions versus their white counterparts. And school was one of the hardest hit places because on a psychological and emotional and economic level, black children were much more affected by these situations than their white counterparts. And so because of that, that's why the Brown versus the Board of Education decision happened, to try to bring some sort of equalization to society as it relates to the black-white divide. But what happens over the course of the 60-plus years after the Brown decision was that schools by default begin to segregate. People begin to segregate themselves into what we now call school apartheid, because we know that 90%, we know that 19%, I'm sorry, I want to make sure my numbers are correct. We know that 19% of the nation's black student population goes to a school in which the population in their school is some 90% are black, right? Majority black schools are some 90%, almost 20% of the black population go to a school like that. And those who don't go to a school like that usually go to a school that has a high population of underprivileged people of color, and not necessarily either school, whether it's 90% black or even 40% black, but it's in an area of underprivilege, do not get the same resources and funding and things that they need to facilitate a better quality education. And it's important to know that things like taxes and property taxes are what fund education throughout the country. And if you don't have property taxes, or if you don't pay high property taxes, you can't expect that money to have to be able to trickle down to education and give quality education to some of these students. And we see it in the achievement gaps. We see it in the amount of African Americans who go to college. We see it in the amount of African Americans who go on, like myself, to get doctorates. We see it in the amount of skilled laborers coming out of the black community. And we know a lot of times that trickles right back down to education. In many instances, sometimes you see a pipeline from schools to prisons. I recall riding through certain neighborhoods. I live in the Los Angeles area. You guys know, Long Beach. You guys know that. And I've recalled riding through LA and even working in some of these schools, and seeing that these schools feel kind of almost like prisons. They look like prisons. They have security level up notch like prisons, and they have security marching around them like prisons. And I was like, wow, because these are in underprivileged areas, and I've also worked in some privileged areas and seen completely different environment and experience. And some of these schools I went to were not funded. They were not sufficient. They were not good. And as an educator, it pained me because I know that these are pipelines to actual prisons, from looking like prisons to actually being in prison for a lot of these people, especially young African American and Latino males. Period. So there's definitely a discrepancy in the African American community as it relates to education. But there's also one, and it affects us majorly, and that's an economic discrepancy that we have within the African American community. That's a third major discrepancy and major disadvantage that we have. The black middle class is first of all, the black community is divided into three different classes within the black community. You have a very pronounced wealthy black class, you have a very pronounced black middle class, and you have an even larger pronounced black poor class. And black middle class is actually better off than the African American poor class in many, many ways. But when we look at the way they live and where they live and their environments and everything else, and as well as their wealth in many ways, they tend to look more like poor whites. The black middle class tend to look like what poor whites look like as it relates to environments, economics, and all of those other things. Which really is just saying you're not really, your middle class is not the same as the white middle class, right? And environment has a huge effect. So say, for example, if you're in the black middle class but you live in the hood, which is no problem, no shade to that, because we have to do that, but you're not going to get the same luxuries and conveniences and stores and facilities and amenities as you would get if you lived in the white middle class. Case clear in point, Compton, Carson, California, Compton, California. These have a high percentage of black middle class people, and you drive through those places don't look like Beverly Hills. Even Ladera Heights in California, which is considered a affluent black community, doesn't look like Beverly Hills with access to amenities and shoppings and facilities and different things for making life easy living in the neighborhood. We also see a higher percentage of African Americans who are underrepresented, represented, I can't speak, in higher paying jobs. African Americans are grossly overrepresented in low paying low wage, kind of blue collar jobs. African Americans make up 12.7, almost 13% of the population in the United States, but make up high percentages of low-wage jobs and poverty. Something is definitely interesting. Compared to all groups, when we look at African Americans, white Americans, Asian Americans, Hispanic Americans, the lowest, highest level and incidence of poverty in the United States are in African Americans, who have been here since 1619 for a very long time in this country, but are on the bottom of the totem pole once again in our country. 52% of families are ran by single mothers. 4% of families are ran by single fathers. 4% to 50. That's an interesting number, right? An interesting contradiction. And only 38 to 39% of families have both parents in the household. So there are some discrepancies in the black community that we have that need some immediate addressing, right? Because they do come to play. When you have a situation like the situation we're in now, that comes to play. That has to be addressed in some concerns. Now, my take on it is this. I am of the school of thought of Marcus Garvey and Malcolm X, and at some point I adopted Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois and a whole bunch of people from the late 19th century, 18th century black elite educated school of thought. I believe personally that it'll never be an equal playing field. Do not expect it to be an equal playing field between blacks and whites and other groups in this country. And so I believe in self-help. And I think it is Booker T. Washington who say it requires an immense amount of energy to pull oneself up, and also takes an immense amount of energy to push others down. But we have to be able to pull ourselves up and help ourselves. Some of these things we can do. Now we know historically there are issues that have caused our situation to be partly where it is. We know that slavery was a 400-year experience that was the starting point, and that gave a benefit to other groups well before us, and didn't allow us to catch up until some 400 years later. That's a hell of a starting point, how it started out. You got a head start, and black folks have to catch up. Another reason why I say that wouldn't work. And there's all kinds of studies. One of my favorite studies is this professor. She's a doctor. I'm trying to think of her name off the top of my head. But she talks about like a post-slave stress disorder complex that some of us have. And I definitely have lived in the black community. I still live in the black communities. I know my people, and I do know that there is a level of post-traumatic slave syndrome that we have out there. So look it up, post-traumatic slave syndrome. It's fascinating work that she is doing, and I 100% have agreed with that for many, many years, even before she published it and put it out there. But so there are historical things, Jim Crow, discrimination, racism. There would be no need for a civil rights movement if everything got clear once we were out of slavery. And then once you got in that, then you got mass incarcerations and the criminal justice system that is built on kind of the work and the labor and the incarceration of black manhood, and kind of the stifling of our progress from a modern perspective, and using capitalism and industrialization and criminalization and legislation to keep black families apart or to tear our communities down and not allow us to be the best that we can be. So we know that. We know that. And black people, we know that. We've known that for years. We are well aware of our history. We're well aware of our story. We know what goes on. So this is why, in my mind, I think it's important that we get to a level of self-help, right? Instead of focusing on mainstream economics, we focus on black economics. It's different. It's different, right? We have to focus on the things that we can do and the resources that we do have. We need to bring them together and focus on. Support a black-owned business. That should be, as a black person, I think that should be a figure in our brains, that at least once a month, 1 to 2 times, maybe 3 times a month, we will give our funds to a black-owned business so that it thrives. I know people thinking, well, I shouldn't have to distinguish black-owned from white-owned. Yes, you do. Because when you look at the disparities between black-owned businesses and white-owned businesses, black-owned businesses are not thriving. But here, white-owned businesses become the norm. You shop at Walmart, which is a white-owned business, but you think nothing of it because it's the status quo. It should be just that normal for you as a black person shopping at a black business. Support black people who are trying to be entrepreneurial. I have a whole business helping black males specifically, people, an endangered community that need the psychological and the life coaching. I would love more clients because I do believe that we need this so that we can be successful and have our minds together to continue to grow and thrive. So support black-owned businesses. Support black families. If you're not someone's father and you see that there is a need for a father figure, you don't have to date the mother or be married to the mother to be a male figure in a black male or a black child's life, or vice versa, a female in a black child's life. So support each other. Community investment, community building. We have to call things that are dangerous to our community, like certain crimes and certain other elements and certain bad practices. We have to call those things out and deal with those things. We're more stronger when we're together than we are divided. And it is important. A finger is weak compared to a fist, right? We got to be that fist. We got to be. And so I think it is important that when we see situations like this current situation, and we see how there is a continual, kind of perpetual, disproportionate impact on the black community, it's time for us to wake up and start doing for ourselves. Self-help. Marcus Garvey was preaching it. Malcolm X was preaching it. W.E.B. Du Bois was preaching it. Booker T. Washington was preaching it. Harriet Tubman was preaching it. Frederick Douglass was preaching it. Richard Allen in the AME Church was preaching it. We are more than just that. We've done some great things. We are inventive. We are powerful. And yes, the nation does need us. It has needed us since its founding. But we need us more than they need us. because now they no longer have the use for us, and they function on our resources and on our labor and on our skills and talents and inventions, and they're going to function because now it works mechanized in the nation. But in our community, we need us more. I hear conversations sometimes, and I'm on a soapbox here. I hear conversations sometimes about the brain drain, right? People who come from other countries as immigrants come to our schools, wind up taking jobs here, and they're taking resources away from those countries and people who would be valuable resources to those countries. But let me be clear. There has been a brain drain in the black community for a very long time, probably since the 1950s, 40s and 50s. There's been a brain drain from the black community, in which the valuable resources for people who in our communities leave our communities, go into the suburbs, go to other places, and they don't reinvest and build up and help the communities. We've got to get that. It has nothing to do with whether you're gay, straight, Christian, atheist, Muslim, doesn't matter. If you black, your interest should be what you look like first. Your community has to be strong. And so I get a little worked up having to hear the same information of that the black community is suffering disproportionately from social issues and from other things. Yes, we know that. But since we've known that for so long, now it's becoming our responsibility to step up, go back and reinvest, to step up, monitor healthcare in the black community, to step up, support the black families, to step up, support black spirituality. Notice I didn't say Christianity, support black spirituality, to step up. It is our time now to step up, because if we don't, we stand to lose so much, because we've already lost so much already. That's it. I know it was powerful. I wanted it to be powerful. Hopefully throughout the presentation of this discussion, you've seen the different stats that I've kind of just intermittently posted in there, because I'm not making these things up. These things are actually based on research. I believe in having a lot of research. I'm a scholar, so you guys know research is important to me. So hopefully some of that was useful. You can probably go back and re-listen and look at some of the research. I want it to be a little interactive so that you're getting visuals and not just me speaking, because I want you to know that what I'm saying is there. It's based on information, it's based on research, and it's true. And we have to do better. We can do better. I love you. I do what I do because I love my people. I love you. I want us to be good, and I want us to come back here every time we have a meeting here, twice a week. You know, sometimes it's once a week. It's been this last week or so, but I want us to meet when we meet here, and I want us to grow and then go off and change the world. We can do this. I know it. I'm amped about it. I'm not going to be pessimistic about it because I know the power of my people. I love y'all, and I will see y'all in the next video.